sports are really important vehicles for relationships.
We have purpose. We have a why. We bring people together. We connect.
I feel like God is our greatest supporter and our greatest coach.
Welcome to Rabbi on the Sidelines. This is Rabbi Sherman from Sinai Temple in Los Angeles. This week we are joined by Teresa Strasser, author of Making It Home. Teresa also is an Emmy-winning writer, Emmy-nominated television host, a long list of accolades, contributor to the LA Times, USA Today, and Today Show. She's been featured on The View, Good Morning America, The Talk, CNN, Good Day New York, a regular guest on Dr. Phil, and co-host of The Adam Carolla Show. We're so excited to have Teresa Strasser. Teresa, great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I'm so excited for the next podcast that you're on, that they'll be able to say on The View, Good Morning America, and on Rabbi on the Sidelines.
Well, you assumed that wouldn't lead. I think it would start with Rabbi on the Sidelines and end with The View.
So actually, let's chat about that for a second. Have you been on a rabbinic podcast before? And what are your hopes for what we're going to speak about today?
I have never been on a rabbinic podcast. Okay, but I know we're not Catholic, but can I start with a confession?
Go for it. It's public.
Okay. And by the way, I wish we did have confession, because I feel like as a Jewish...
Sorry about that.
No problem. Maybe that was an act of God.
Exactly.
Hoping
Go
that
ahead,
I wouldn't
confession.
confess. Okay, so here's my confession. My book is, I'm so happy with the book. I love the book. It took 18 months to write and probably a few years before that to think about. And I feel like I'm able to tap into a part of my brain when I'm writing that I can't do when I'm talking. In other words, I'm a much better writer than I am a talker. So I feel like I'm not great on podcasts.
That's so fascinating as being an Emmy-nominated TV host, but saying that the writing is over the talking.
Yeah, I'm just much better at writing than talking. A lot of times I can't listen to podcast interviews I've done because I just think, why was I rambling? Get to the point.
Well, hopefully the speaking is from the heart and the soul, and it's the unedited version. And that's really what your book is about. Teresa Strasser, author of Making It Home. If you've not had a copy, amazing, as Cal Ripken Jr. says, a wonderful book. What I really love about this book is, of course, the story that we'll get into, but also the different quotes that you have right before each chapter. And one of them is about the 84th rule, I believe. I want to hop into that and say, what is this 84th rule, and why are there 83 before, and how does that relate to this idea of making it home?
Oh, this is fun because I can talk Buddhism with a rabbi.
There we go. That's why I started. We'll get to the Jewish piece.
Okay, so you're talking about 83 problems, which a lot of people know about Jay-Z and his 99 problems, but Buddha, way before that, talked about 83 problems. So I might mess the story up, but it's, here it is. A farmer goes to the Buddha to talk about all that my wife doesn't love me, my crops aren't growing, and lists all of these problems. And the Buddha tells the farmer, well, like everybody, you have 83 problems. I can't help you with any of those 83 problems, but I can only help you with the 84th. And the farmer says, what's that? Thinking that you shouldn't have the first 83.
Exactly. And so we do all have problems. Everybody has something. And at the same time, you're able to not get over the problem because they're always with you. We're able to live through and with those problems. So let's get into this aspect of this book. It seems like it came from a moment of grief, but it ends, or it gets to a moment of redemption. And we'll chat about redemption in a little while. First, let's go through the sports journey, because it is a sports and a faith book, literally. What was your sports journey growing up? Were you involved with Little League before you had these amazing children and your husband's coaching, or was sports not on the docket? What's the sports story?
I was a horrendous athlete. I was on one soccer team one season. And Rabbi, I prayed so hard every game. Please do not let the ball come to me. I don't want these girls running toward me, kicking at my shin guards. I was uncoordinated, slow, and weak. However, my brother was a great athlete. My older brother, a year and a half older. And I went to a lot of his baseball games. He played all the sports, but baseball was his main love. And I spent a lot of my childhood watching my brother play from the sidelines.
And so what was that in terms of having your brother sort of looking up to him, not just off the field, but on the field? And then we'll chat a little about your brother and how you sort of led separate lives for a number of years.
So back in the 70s, parenting was very different, as you may have heard. And so, for example, my parents were divorced when I was 3 and my brother was 5. And they sort of couldn't figure out how to divide the kids. They didn't have any assets to speak of. So my dad took my brother and my mom took me. We were separated. And so I didn't grow up in the same household as my brother. We saw each other about once a month. My dad lived in LA. I lived in San Francisco. And I would actually travel to visit my dad and my brother.
Yeah, that was a crazy story.
Isn't that crazy? Starting from age 8, I was traveling the prison belt of Central California, like with my ponytails and like a paper bag lunch.
And you made it here to tell us.
Yeah, I know. When kids aren't allowed to walk down the street to the park by themselves, Gen X in me is like, wow, really? Because I flew alone from age 3 and I took the bus alone. And I didn't really think anything of it. It was just how I got from point A to point B.
And so you had not the best relationship with your parents. There was a lot of, I would say, trauma involved in terms of these experiences that, again, was no fault of your own and sometimes really no fault of theirs. At what moment did you recognize that maybe that was not the functional family of perhaps your friends or the surroundings that you were in?
Well, I observed that my friends had a different relationship with their siblings when they lived together. And I was always really jealous of people. Oh, my big brother this, my sister that. I knew that I had a brother and I loved him and I just wanted to hang out with him. I just wanted approval from him and I wanted us to be close like real siblings. But there was really nothing I could do to make that happen from afar.
And let's talk about your brother, because this is the point that really hit home with me. I had a brother that was 17 months older. Your brother was 18 months older. We bonded over baseball, and then your brother had an illness. And maybe take us through a few of those moments of the diagnosis and how that began to bond you in a way that you never thought it would.
So my brother had a very rare form of cancer, which was a spinal tumor on his sacrum. And when he was first diagnosed, it's funny thinking back because I Google everything. I am Dr. Google, but I didn't, somehow I was able to hold on to the illusion that he was really going to be fine. He was going to be fine. Like they didn't know what it was at first. It was very large when they found it. It was 10 centimeters.
Wow.
My brother was a real stoic guy. And as an adult, he played a lot of tennis. And so he was always having a bad back. Like I remember we always loved going to the movies. We're like a movie family. Maybe that's like a divorced dad thing. Like dad was always taking us to the movies. But I remember my brother couldn't sit through a double feature because his back. And we always thought, well, he has scoliosis and he played all those sports and he was always taking Advil. And then finally his chiropractor said, you got to get an MRI. But by that time it was 10 centimeters. And so once they ruled out bone cancer, I was so relieved. I was like, oh, well, now he's going to be fine. There's nobody tougher than my brother. They took it out at Johns Hopkins and, it was a little touch and go. He had radiation. He had a lot of treatment. He ended up going back for many surgeries because there were infections. But ultimately, he seemed like he was going to be able to lead a pretty normal life. He had 2 kids after that. And then 7 years later, the tumor came back and they were unable to treat it. So he died at 47.
And so at that moment, your family sort of comes together again in a way that they never could have imagined. Your dad, who living in a trailer park up north, goes to visit him literally by his bedside. You're there. Your mom sort of comes back into the picture, but your parents have very different experiences also of dealing with trauma, where your dad was really there and your mom had a hard time handling that. What was the difference in terms of those aspects, and was faith involved in any of your experiences during that time?
That's a great question. So I always used to joke with people that there should be a sitcom about my parents getting back together, which they didn't really get back together romantically, but of course in the sitcom they would have. When my brother got sick, as anybody knows who's had a relative with a long illness, there are just a lot of long hospital stays. With my brother, he was in and out, and sometimes he'd be in for 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time. And then he was in various rehabilitation centers, like you're too sick to go home. His wife wasn't able to fully take care of him, but he was well enough to not be in the intensive care unit. So there were all these intermediary places, and a lot of them are hellish, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And they just warehouse people. But my dad ended up being with my brother in a lot of those places, and so did my mom. Okay, so at Johns Hopkins, when he first got sick, there's family housing, and so my parents were living together,
Wow.
reunited. They'd been divorced since I was 3, and they had never gotten along better. Like, my mom would call and say, I couldn't do this without your dad. Your father is the best. He is never shook. He is never rattled emotionally. He's always there. He never doesn't know what to say to Morgan when Morgan is scared. And then my dad would call me and say, your mom is amazing. She's a
Wow.
genius. She keeps track of every medication. She even knows when the doctors make a mistake.
Wow. And so that reunion happened, but at the same time, there were different ways of processing that grief. What did that look like?
Yeah. So when he became terminal, I mean, that's a moment that I'll never forget. And it's weird. I remember getting a text from my sister-in-law, and it just said, doctor says terminal. He has 6 months. And at that point, there's magical thinking that you have, like, he's going to beat the odds. I just, in my heart and my mind, I really, really thought, like, my brother is not going to die, because some people survive this. And I really told myself he's going to be one of those people. But when the doctor gives you 6 months, literally till the second he died, a part of me thought he's not really going to die. He's just not really going to die. But when he had toward the end, in the last few months, it was very, very, it's just something that, even though I have kids, it's hard for me to understand that experience of losing a child like that. You're totally helpless. Obviously, I wrote about being a mom in the bleachers, and the analogy between the two things. Obviously, one is life or death and one is just baseball, but fundamentally, there are so many ways that you can't really truly help your kids, and that you'll just be a witness to things in their lives. So my dad didn't flinch, and he was able to be there. My brother got really, really, really sick, and then he was in a wheelchair, and then he was in bed, and it was extremely difficult to be part of that. And my dad, just however he's wired, he was better able to do it. My mom wrote an email to my brother and his wife saying that she wouldn't be able to come back and visit, and she wouldn't be able to see him again. And at the time, I was so angry. I just thought, how can she do that? How can she do that to her child? Like, how can she not be there for his last moments? But I think now I understand, because sometimes there's just something you just simply can't do.
And at the same time, just months later, she passes away. And obviously there was an illness, but it also seems like a broken heart.
Yeah, she died exactly 4 months to the day after my brother, and she hadn't really been sick. So even the doctors at UCSF said, I think she died of a broken heart.
Wow. And it's true. In fact, in our Psalms each day, we say that we speak about God healing a broken heart. And you have found healing in a way that most people maybe would look at as an escape, but you actually dug deep into it. And that's why this book came about, Making It Home by Teresa Strasser. And it's about these 2 chairs that you see, Costco chairs, I believe,
Yep.
that you and your father reunited in a way that he didn't give the childhood to you that you were giving to your children, and he's become an unbelievable grandfather. So take us to that move down from, I believe, San Francisco to Arizona, and the life of Little League as a mom of 2 children. And then we'll talk about that connection between your children and Morgan. And Judaism does have a belief in afterlife. It might not be the way that traditional view is, but it seems like the afterlife has come alive on that baseball field.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I love about baseball is that it hasn't really changed much in so many years.
The pitch clock.
Yeah, other than the pitch clock, which, and by the way, that's why people don't like it, because tradition, to quote Tevye. So yeah, there's baseball, you know what to expect. There's only one way around the bases, and the rules, other than the pitch clock, are basically unchanged. And I think there's so much comfort in that, especially for my dad and I. And we basically turned one single season of Little League into our own grief group of 2 in those Costco chairs, just a couple of Jews in our chairs behind the first baseline, praying for wins and hits and home runs, and feeling that eternal connection to my brother, who we'd also watched play, and my dad had assistant coached. So I moved to Arizona, and after my brother died, my dad moved here also, living in a trailer park. And so I knew my dad loved baseball. I didn't know that much about it. I'd watch my brother play, but I remember our first game of the season I write about in Making It Home. My dad talking about the top of our lineup. He said, "Oh, we got a murderer's row." And I was like, "Is Sister Helen Prejean going to show up? What is a murderer's row?" I knew nothing. So everything I know about baseball, really, and grief, I learned from my dad that season.
And so when did you like in the process of writing this book, was it after the fact, like, oh my gosh, I just went through this grief process and healing? Or when did you realize that sitting in these chairs, this was something special that you needed to put on paper and get out?
I knew even before the season started. So I write about in my book, my dad, let me just set it up. My dad's trailer park right here on Hayden Road, it shares a fence with a cemetery and mortuary.
Right.
And my dad's always joking, when I die, just throw me over the fence.
Over, exactly.
So I could see that my dad never talked about my brother after he died. And it was just a heaviness. And I didn't know what to do for my dad. And I thought, well, maybe I'll take him to a Jewish grief service. And it was right across, it was right over the fence at Green Acres Mortuary. So I took him to that service, and I could tell he was so uncomfortable. He was shifting around, and the rabbi said, the word shalom doesn't just mean hello, it means hello and goodbye. And my dad kind of out of the side of his mouth said, "Can we say shalom to the service?" And I'm like, okay, it's all right, Dad, fine. So he's in his, Walmart shorts and his Nikes, and we walk back to his trailer. And on the way back, he was just looking down, shuffling his feet, and he said, "It's out of order, T. A father should never outlive his son. It's out of order." And I had so much guilt because I had one way of grieving and he had another. And it was clear to me that I had disrespected where he was, and that his grief was different from mine. And I went to a grief counselor, and she told me that I wasn't allowed to rank grief, but I do anyway. And I felt like the grief of a father is different from the grief of a sister, and that I should never have yanked him into this service before he was ready. And he looked so just emotionally demolished. And I had guilt, and I was scrambling, like, how do I lift his mood? And we're sitting, single wides. Rabbi, I don't know how much time you've spent in trailer parks, but single wides have like these stairs, and they're mobile, like they have wheels, and they have railings. So there's like 3 stairs with this gray carpet, and I'm sitting there with my dad, and he's just so quiet and in a terrible mood. And I'm scrambling in my brain, like, things that make my dad happy, must cheer up Dad. And then I realized that Little League season was going to start in a couple weeks. And in the minors here in Arizona, 9 and 10-year-olds, the minors is when things get real, because the kids pitch every inning. And I said, hey, Dad, Little League starting in a couple weeks. They pitch every inning in the minors. And he literally, his eyes just lit up, and he goes, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, Dad, Nate's going to be pitching." And then till the sun went down, we talked about baseball the rest of the night. And I knew then that it was going to be grief or baseball, and we'd take baseball.
And so what would be your advice to others who have gone through this parent-child grief and then also sibling grief? You found it in baseball. Maybe somebody finds it in ballet. Somebody finds it in art. How do you get to that point to say, this is the spot that we can do this grief together?
Well, I just stumbled into this unintentionally, because I think what baseball was in many ways was just an excuse to be together. And that's part of the Jewish grieving rituals, right?
Yes,
like, you have to have a minyan to say the grief prayers, right?
Kaddish, exactly.
Yeah, Kaddish, right? You have to be in a group. It forces you to be communal. And that's baseball. When you're in the bleachers, you're on a team with the
Mhm.
parents and the little brothers and the little sisters. And when you're on a team, that's your family, that's your minion. And by the way, when you're a sports fan, that's your group. Like my husband is from Philly. He could be walking through an airport, in a Phillies hat anywhere in the world, and someone will find him and go, Phillies.
Yep.
And that's their group.
And when did the people around you understand what was happening to you? And did they join that piece as it was going on?
I think, okay, everyone knows my dad because we were those weirdos that went to every practice, not just every game. We were the practice weirdos.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't miss a minute because it was all, not only was it a distraction, but we were deeply, deeply invested in these kids. I mean, we were living and dying by every pitch. We would text and call each other 10, 12 more times a day about the lineup, who should be playing shortstop, who should be at the hot corner, why is so-and-so not in center field, the lineup. I mean, we became so involved. We deeply cared about these 9 and 10-year-olds.
And there's one person I think that really was a big piece of this, and you just mentioned your husband, Daniel, not only the coach, but just seems like a rock in the family and was able to put all these pieces together. What did his role play in making it home to happen?
Well, he was the coach of the Purple Pinstripes, which is my son's team. In the book, he was 9. He's now 14, still playing, almost 6 feet tall now. So my husband is, nobody knows what he does, first of all. Okay. He works for IBM. I don't even know what he does. Something to do with contracts, leasing, buying, spreadsheets, algorithms. But he's like a math guy and a Rush nerd, if that paints a picture for you.
Absolutely.
And so he approached the draft with all of that nerdiness. I mean, he moneyballed this draft. He did have his spreadsheets, and on the way home from the draft, he called me and he was aghast because none of the coaches had their laptops. Like, how could you, things change in real time in a draft. Like, how do you're not ready. So he took it very seriously. And he's also, he's just wired very different. Everyone in my family's emotional. People always have vendettas. At this very moment, nobody is talking to my Aunt Julie because she's a Fox News Trumper and the rest of my family are liberals. So there's always trouble and drama and source. Whereas my husband's family is not like that. And he's just an endlessly patient person. In fact, we joke because we've seen him lose his patience one time, and that was coaching baseball when after the season I write about him making it home, he was coaching and our team wasn't very good that year. Nate, my oldest, was like our best hope, and we really needed a base runner. We finally were in a position to win a game. I think he might have had a full count. And no. He must have had 3 balls and 1 strike. So my husband, had the take sign on. Don't swing. Let's just take a walk and get to first. And it was a real bad high pitch, and Nate swung and missed. And my husband just took his baseball hat off, threw it on the ground. And look, that's like his temper tantrum for the last, that's all the rage he's expressed in the last 15 years. But yeah, so he is really like, and also he translates. I don't know if other people have had this experience, but because he's an outsider to our family and he doesn't have like the emotional baggage, I feel like he's able to translate. When my mom was alive, she'd say stuff like, well, if you ever want me to visit, you just tell me when it might work for you. And I'd be like, why doesn't she just visit? And then my husband would translate, no, T, you need to give her exact dates and invite her. That's what she's waiting for. So he's often been the go-between. And to this day, when my dad still goes to every one of my kids' games, my husband will drive, 20 minutes out of his way to the trailer park and 20 minutes back to pick up my dad to take him to every game.
And what's Nate's role in this piece? Obviously, as a 9-year-old, what was his relationship with Morgan before with your brother? And during this process, did that change him as well? Genetics
are so weird because my brother Morgan died when my son Nate was very young. So it's not like Nate absorbed Morgan's characteristics or quirks, yet they have the same laugh. They have the same like heel toe walk. They're both left-handed, and they were both born on September 24th.
Guess what? That's my birthday too.
What?
Actually, I read that, and the similarities of some of the aspects of our stories. I was like, this is too crazy. So
That's crazy.
but I've never been to Arizona yet. So
Spring
when I share-
training, you got to come out.
oh my gosh, I would love that. But I did go to the Dodger game the other night, which was pretty amazing.
Do you keep track? This is a stupid question, but I should say, how closely do you track who is Jewish in the MLB?
In the MLB, that's fascinating. Not as much as I should be, but I know there actually is a rabbi that does that. Actually, I had Josh Rawitch, the president of the Hall of Fame, was one of my first guests. He worked for the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers.
He used to live out here in Arizona.
Exactly. I don't believe Freddie Freeman is Jewish, but he's got
Well,
quite
we
the
should
Jewish
do a
name.
podcast of people with Jewish names that really should be Jewish that aren't.
I would love to do that. Rod Carew, as we know from Adam Sandler's song, not a Jew.
That's right.
Yeah, great song. Great song.
I know, but did he convert?
I don't know if he did, but obviously Koufax is. Actually, I'm on the board of the Southern California Jewish Sports Hall of Fame, so I can check their records. And
I think Max Fried. Max Fried is from the Valley, right?
Yep. And in a couple of months, we're going to host Ryan Landry, who from the Boston Red Sox, who actually played on Team Israel. And that's an amazing story.
I love him. And by the way, he's written a children's book.
Yep. He's coming to our school to read that to our children. Going to do some wiffle ball clinics and have him on the podcast as well.
Oh, I wish I could be there.
So I'm going to play a little clip that I found of you and your father, and speaking really about the themes that come about of what it means to have a do-over in life.
Appreciate him over the course of that baseball season, watching all those games.
Developing a deeper love for her father with every crack at the bat.
He's not going to miss one single second of his grandkids playing baseball, and so I can appreciate him for who he is and not wishing he was somebody else.
He got a do-over as a grandpa.
Do you think you're a better grandparent than parent?
Oh yeah, way better.
Teresa hopes the lessons she's learned during that Little League season will help others heal.
A better grandfather than a parent. I often hear that. Take us through that piece and what that looks like today off the field when Little League is not happening.
Well, baseball is a great backdrop to this story because it has redemption baked into it as a sport. And I think a lot of grandparents have this experience. It's a do-over. You get another 3 swings, you get another at-bat, you get another inning to try and do all the things better that you failed to do as a parent. And obviously that's what it's been for my dad, a do-over.
And how has it made you a better parent in watching both what you had within your own life? And we're not going to talk about it all right now, but you have a fascinating stepmother challenge that you ended up actually winning an award for after she passed away, that you maybe you'll share that as well. But how did you become a better parent?
Yeah. So yeah, I had a really challenging step monster. I wasn't a fan of hers, and I was very happy when she died. And I didn't really know how to handle that. It's not something people talk about. And so I ended up writing a story about it. It was in the Jewish Journal in Los Angeles. It was a cover story. And I won a big journalism award for it, which was such a full circle moment because my stepmother had always told me that I was stupid and had no talent and would never come to anything. So when I won that award, I was like, thank you for this. But people ask me about that article to this day, because I think, many people have had that experience of a death that they weren't sad that the person was gone. So anyway, if you're one of those people, Google it, you'll find it. Sorry, I got away from your original question because you said we'd talk about that later, but I dove into it because people are always interested.
But I also think your dad's reaction to that when you asked him later in life, like, well, you saw that she was not so nice to me, so why didn't that relationship end? And he was very humble. He said, like, yeah, I knew if she was asked to leave, she wouldn't have anything. And so his humility, his kindness really came out in that conversation after. Did that affect how you saw that relationship after the fact?
Yeah, I think I had been so resentful of my dad, and I'd been watering this grudge garden for many decades. Like, why did he allow this woman to be so abusive to my brother and I? And why, like, there's a story I read about in the book where one time he asked her to leave. There was a big fight in the living room, and my dad was taking me to the movies, and she was mad. She didn't like us to spend time together. And so she threw a lamp. It whizzed by my head. It hit the door behind me and shattered. And my dad said, "You better pack up and leave by the time we get home." And that movie, I don't remember what movie it was or anything about the movie, but I've never been happier. So 2 hours, I thought, like, ding dong, the witch is dead. Carol's going to be gone when we get home. And then, the vase was swept up when we got home, and nobody ever spoke about it again. And obviously she was still there. So I had wondered this, and I asked him later, I think after my brother died, like, why didn't you kick her out? Like, why did you allow this? And he said she would have had nowhere to go. She wouldn't have had any family to take her in. She had never had a job. And he just said, like, I couldn't put her out on the street. I thought about calling the sheriff and telling her, to leave and putting her out, but I couldn't do it.
So I know you asked to read something from your book, but I'm going to read something from your book, because towards the end, you get an email from your dad, and it says this: "There's an unbreakable connection between you and Morgan that is apart from how close in proximity you are, or how much you are in contact. There is this phenomenon in quantum mechanics called entanglement. Two particles can be around the world from each other, and if you measure one, the other kind of comes to attention. These particles are said to be entangled. Physicists are aware of it, but they do not really understand it. You and Morgan are entangled." How are you still entangled with your brother's memory and the life that you lived with the relationship with your father?
Thank you for reading that, proving my initial thesis that I'm a much better writer than talker. Although that was my dad's. That was word for word an email from my dad.
Yep.
So he gets the credit. Einstein talked about the entangled, the theory of the quantum theory of entangled particles, and he couldn't wrap his head around it, and he called it spooky action at a distance. And I've always loved that phrase. So the theory, two particles that are entangled can be miles apart, and the actions of one affect the actions of another. Does that mean that we're still connected to our loved ones? I mean, right? It's possible.
You're making me cry here on air, because I think about this often, and you see those signs so often. As I shared with you, some of my own signs that I see through baseball, through your story. I'd only say it's possible. I would actually say if our eyes are open to it, then it's there. You just actually have to look for it.
I agree. And, as you know, because it's in my book, the time when I'm closest to believing in a higher power is when my kids are playing baseball. And that's when, like they say, there are no atheists in foxholes. There are no atheists in the bleachers, because when it's your kid at bat, you're like, please, Jesus, Moses, Elvis, help me.
And so you wrote to me that over the last few years since you've written this book and experienced this, you've leaned into faith. What does that mean, and how can others have that experience too?
I think I still have as much trouble as ever in the sort of cloud daddy vision of a God, but being part of this team, and now both my boys playing on so many different teams and being part of those teams, there's a visceral experience I have of God and of belonging. And I have that when I go to temple. Like when whether it's Yom Kippur or Shabbat, I'm going to cry when I hear the songs, and I won't know why. It's just like, it's a physical experience happening to my body. And I always think, well, I'm connected to my mom through this, she was the same way. She cried every time, and she wasn't religious. She didn't speak a word of Hebrew. Her parents were European immigrants. They were communists. They didn't believe in religion. But if you put her in a synagogue, she would cry. And then I thought, I'm connected to her, and I'm connected to all the generations before her. And that's why when my body is in this community, I have this moving experience. And so my younger one goes to Sunday school, and he really loves it. Like, he loves being Jewish. He identifies with it. It's the team that he is on in life.
I love that. Actually, you might not know this, but Rabbi Solomon Schechter, one of the first American rabbis, actually said that if you're going to be a successful rabbi in America, you need to know how to speak about baseball. he was really speaking about the immigrant experience because that's where the people are. But I actually think he was speaking about this, making it home, that maybe he didn't understand the faith lessons of you can't protect your kids from life, that redemption is always possible, that comes from these real lived experiences that we can then translate into the faith world and hopefully bring some of those faith lessons back onto the baseball field. So making it home, what's one lesson that's not in the book that you've learned after as a message to our listeners today?
Well, okay, first, because you're like one of the few people I could truly get mystical about baseball with. So, here's something. Okay, just for a moment, wrap your head around the fact that a baseball game could go on forever. Have you thought about
Right.
that?
My kids asked me that the other night at Dodger games. It was 2-2 in the 8th. They said, "Is there overtime?" I said, "There can be as much overtime as you need."
So, conceivably, right, a baseball game could last forever. Not a pitch because of the stupid pitch clock. No, I think I'm pro pitch clock, but I understand why purists don't like it because it takes away this mystical aspect of a game with no clock, right?
Mhm.
So it's been said that because there's no clock and a game could go on forever, that baseball connects the past and the present, the living and the dead. It's
Mhm.
this big continuum, right? Where my son's out there and it's the same game as when my brother was out there.
Right.
And it's the same game as when your brother was out there. So it in a way, it's baseball is another way of talking about entangled particles.
Mm. I love it. Baseball, anything that you're passionate about, entangled particles is what we are. That's why we have purpose in this life and give meaning to our, I like to say, give the sacred to our ordinary aspects of this life. And so we are honored that we were joined today by Teresa Strasser, author of this unbelievable book, Making It Home. If you like baseball, it's a great book for you. If you like faith, it's a great book for you. If you want to laugh and you want to cry all at the same time, this is also a wonderful book for you. Teresa, it's so great to have you on Rabbi on the Sidelines, and we look forward to continued connection. Have a great day.
Thank you for having me.